What kind of dog do you have?
He's a Pomsky.
Oh,
So that's half Pomeranian, half Husky. He's adorable.
How tall is he?
Yeah, about that tall. His
Yeah.
back's probably about that tall. He's about 25 pounds. He might be closer to 30 right now. He's got a little
Oh,
weight to lose,
so
but he's
cute.
adorable.
How old
Thank
is he?
you. 4 years old.
Oh.
Just exactly 4 years old in April. Yeah,
Oh, well, later I need to see a picture.
absolutely.
Hi, this is Jordan Hill with Dirt to Sky Business Podcast. And thank you, Collier Law and Saltwater Wellness, for sponsoring this episode today. I am really honored today to have Ryan Tribbett on the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm a
Good.
big fan of your podcast. I've seen almost
Thank
every episode, I
you.
think. So really exciting for me to
Thank
be here with you
you.
this morning.
I've been waiting for this day. I knew it was just a matter of time. Yeah. Well, I've known about you for a long time, and it's been really fun these last few days just getting to know you and more about what you do. And so you are the president of PacWest Lobby Group.
Yes.
Yes. So can you explain to everybody listening what PacWest is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the sort of most prevalent question that I ever get is, what is a lobbyist? What do you
Yes.
do? So essentially, we're the eyes and ears and a mouthpiece for, it could be a person, it could be a business, it could be a nonprofit. We represent local governments as well. And so the first way that you can sort of be impactful in the process is to know what's going on. So we help provide that insight. We are one of the few big box lobby firms. There's probably just a handful. The most of the industry operates as sort of father-son duos or sole proprietorships. But there's something different that you get when you hire a lobby group like PacWest or the Public Affairs Council, which is we have eyes and ears in just about every committee room in the legislature. And so being able to report back what's happening is the foundational sort of necessary step that an organization would have to be able to be impactful in the process. So first you have to know what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And when you refer to eyes and ears, what exactly does that mean?
There are about 25 committees that meet on any given day in the legislature and for about an hour and a half each. And to keep track of everything that's going on takes an army. And it's really hard, if not impossible, for the old school sole proprietors and father-son duos to actually keep a handle on the onslaught that comes. In this legislative session, I'll give you some context of it. We had 3,500 bills introduced in a 6-month period of time.
Wow.
Just to read through that and understand what's going on and then assess the impacts is a Herculean effort in itself.
Oh my gosh.
And that's just to know what's going on. That's before you actually develop a strategy, set objectives and priorities, and try to actually maneuver the process in a constantly changing landscape. That 3,500 bills is just getting your head wrapped around the lay of the land.
And does PacWest go through all of those or just some of them?
All of them. We read every single bill that comes through. At least there's a summary section of every bill, and we read that, and then we look to see if there's any potential impacts to clients. And then if we think there's any potential impact to a client, then we read the whole bill through. And then if we still see it, then we forward to the clients. Usually it's a government affairs board or an in-house political coordinator that we're interfacing with on a day-to-day basis so that we can really determine what the true impact of something is to the business or the nonprofit that we represent so that we can put that human face on what's going on. I'll give you an example of like budget cuts, right? Like this is not a good session for revenue's down. And so people are all concerned about, we need to save this much money here, this much money there. And it's being run by bean counters that are completely divorced from the human impacts of the decisions that they're making because they're just trying to balance a budget. And so having a lobbyist or somebody go in there who can tell that story is incredibly important for these businesses that we represent.
Right. Okay. We've all seen movies and shows and heard things about what a lobbyist is and does, and it actually sounds or actually looks very different than what you just described. I mean, what you just described is so necessary and needed. So what are kind of some of the myths that people have?
That is a good question. There are a lot of myths about lobbyists and the lobby industry. So every year, when I got my start, I get it through a political internship with Portland State University, and they still run that program today. I go back every year and speak to the class that I used to be. So 22 years later,
Oh my gosh.
this year, I was talking with them. And I always have this exercise that I do where I go around the room and I ask the students, like, who here's parents or teachers? And a few people raise their hand. And then I go, now who's here's parents are doctors? Raise their hand. And I'm like, well, you're represented by the Oregon Medical Association. You know, you're represented by how many of parents are nurses? Oh, you have the Oregon Nurses Association that represents you. And then we always get to the end and there's a few like stragglers that don't have their hand up. And then I go, oh, but you have, all of you are students and you have the Oregon Student Association. So in fact, all of you are represented by a lobbyist right now. So that's something that I think breaks down barriers for people, because until that moment, and you kind of see them kind of go, oh, wait a minute, this breaks the mold of what they were thinking, that all of those occupations and everyone is probably in this room is represented by a lobbyist somewhere who's out advocating for the interest of realtors or any industry, really. I mean, honestly, there's a lobby group that does the Backflow Device Testers Association that does like make sure that sprinkler systems don't run the irrigation backwards up the pipe into your house. Like, there's an association that lobbies on behalf of the interest of that specific group. I'm telling you, everybody has a lobbyist. You just don't know it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so then when the light bulb goes on for people, when I hear that, it's like, wow, you know, I might take things for granted when somebody was actually out there like fighting for, you know.
I mean, like the Boys and Girls Club has a lobbyist, right? Like people think about lobbyists as being the sort of the Mad Men movie or the Thank You for Smoking movie, but it's really everybody has a lobbyist there, and there's really positive interest. Because if you look at how we're just being a mouthpiece for someone else's interests and objectives, and that doesn't mean that what those objectives are is somehow impure. I think of our job as that of like almost like a public defender, where everybody deserves representation, like professional representation for a redress of their grievances before their government, whether that's in a judicial setting or in the legislative setting. Everybody deserves to know how to navigate that process well. And I think for a lot of normal people that are not close to this industry, government feels like a mystery. It feels like a lockbox that is not open for them. And they feel like that for a good reason, because it's actually not. Right. Like we talked about the 3,500 bills that are introduced. You know, the vast majority of those bills die. Like people think that process is set up to pass bills, but it's really set up to kill bills. There's so many hurdles. There's so many different ways that you can sort of have your bill run into the ditch or run into a dead end, that the vast majority of bills die. And a lot of it because people don't know how to navigate the process, and the landscape is constantly changing on them.
Yeah. Are you able to share a specific story about something that PacWest, you know, how made a difference in the case of, you know, a bill either being, you know, killed or passed?
Sure. I think probably the most meaningful thing I've done is in my career isn't something that you'd ever see on a political mail piece. Nobody's ever going to, it's never going to come up in an election to be, you know, a hot topic issue. But so for many years in construction, they would hold something called retainage, which was 5% of the overall contract price. And they would withhold that until the end of the project. And this was put in place like 100 years ago, before there was license laws, before there was bonding laws and insurance requirements to do public works or even private works, because the bill affected both. But they would hold this 5% until the end of the project. And then after you passed your permits and after the occupancy was approved, then you might get your money released then, or in some cases it would last almost a year, or in some cases more, before you get paid. So construction industry is they operate on a margin of 3 to 5%. So you're thinking about this as a business perspective. You have your entire profit that you're going to make off this project that you're working on for 6 months or a year. You paid your material suppliers up front. You paid your workers weekly. You paid their fringe benefit checks monthly, but you don't get paid back for a whole year, in some cases longer. If that was a human being that was having to, they would call that wage theft.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But for a business, it was just sort of the cost of doing business. And it was just the way it had always been. What I was able to pass was a law that allowed them to post a bond, a retention bond, to represent that 5%. Like that's an insurance product. It's much cheaper. You could give an example of like what it would cost to take $500,000 retainers that could be held against you. You could insure that $500,000 for about $10,000. So we're talking a $490,000 delta, putting that money back in the pockets of small businesses to take on their next project, hire new employees, give pay raises, do professional development, any of the things that a business owner would want, and could put that money to work for them rather than being tied up in this meaningless retention program.
Wow. And when was this?
Just 2 years ago, last session.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
And that has had such I know, without knowing, the ripple effect that has had on, in Oregon and in people's lives and in their businesses. I mean, what a huge impact. That's
It is in my whole career. That's the thing that has affected my
Yeah.
clients in the most day-to-day basis than anything else I've ever done.
Right. Yeah.
But you would never hear about it. No one will ever talk about it. Never. There's no controversy behind it.
Oh my gosh. Now, do those in the construction industry, do they know all that you did, or do they just see that the law has changed?
No, they do. I mean, our clients, we meet with them monthly in their government affairs board meetings or in their board of directors meetings to give them updates. So they're the ones who identified this as a problem previously. And then what we do is then look at, and that's how it works in all of our sort of interactions with clients, is they don't understand the process. They know that there's something happening to them that they don't like. But they don't know what's causing it usually.
Right.
Like, is a law making this happen? Is a law being silent and allowing someone to do something against me that, or is it a law or is it a rule? Because there's administrative rules as well. And so the first thing we do is we get a problem given to us by a client, and then we have to go research to figure out what specifically is causing that and what levers we can pull on to try to fix it.
Wow. And there must have been so much work and research that you guys have to do and go back, like looking at history and looking at all the different components. I mean, how long did it take?
I mean, the research, there certainly is a lot of research that goes into it, but that's actually the easiest part of the job, because all of that's in some sort of historical record and archive somewhere you can find, and it's searchable. The hardest part is actually to build the relationships with the people, which is an ongoing year-round process, so that when an issue comes up, that you already know the people well enough to say, I need help. Like you can't just go in and meet people for the first time and get to know them when you already need something from them.
Got it.
Like you have to develop a relationship and cultivate that and maintain that relationship year round, so that when an issue does come up, that they're ready, they know who you are, they know what you stand for, and they're ready to jump in and start helping immediately.
And then when you say they, who is that?
That would be, elected officials.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so do you need to maintain those relationships with just as many as possible, or?
Yeah. I mean, people have different approaches. Our approach has always been to be issue oriented and issue focused. I couldn't care less if you're a Republican or a Democrat or don't affiliate with a party.
Right.
I'm about certain issues. Like I'm about apprenticeship and mentorship. And if you're about those things and support those policies, then I'm going to support you, and I'm going to speak and vocalize that to the public because it's what I believe in. I don't necessarily believe so much in people, like an individual, as I do like support ideas.
Yeah. How many employees are in your organization?
I have 10 employees right now. It's kind of fluctuated a little bit over time, but we're growing. And we have, one of the things I'm most proud about is we have the most diverse age range of anyone in politics. So my oldest employee is 73 and my youngest employee is 18.
Wow.
And so we have the whole continuum of people going to college, people just out of college, we law school grads, we have people like I'm in school for my MBA right now.
Yeah.
So we've really embraced this sort of passing down. We call it the mentorship model, where everybody has something to learn and everybody has something to teach. And so even our older employees are learning about social media and things like that from the younger employees who are more experts on that than 60, 70-year-olds could be.
Right.
So.
You're really investing in the next generation, you and your team,
I think it's really about passing down sort of the lessons learned
Uh-huh.
from our elders
Right.
and handing down that knowledge base and those insights, that historical wisdom, and then staying constantly updating and trying to be better.
Yeah. I'm only going to just mention it before we move on. But by the way, I just have to say congratulations because the Salem Chamber is awarding you Employer of the Year.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so myself and everybody listening, I mean, we have so much we can learn from you. And you just mentioned, though, on the other side, is you and your team are always learning, always growing. And that in and of itself is really important and inspiring. But I would love to hear a little bit more about your team. They sound incredible. I'm excited to hear a little more about them, but how do you find them and what do you look for?
Well, that's a big question. There's a lot to unpack there. Well, I've only been an employer for like a little over 4 years now, or about
Okay.
4.5. And
Uh-huh.
so one of the sort of approaches that I had initially to how to treat the staff and how to treat employees was really to respect the gravity of what the employer-employee relationship can be if you did everything you could for each other, rather than sort of what you hear a lot about, people focused on sort of the legal minimums of what my obligations are.
Right.
I've had less issues with the sort of minimum obligations because we're always setting our goals so much higher than that. Sort of the bare minimum is never something that really comes into mind very much.
Right.
But I like to focus on the human being, and like I have this belief that if you have a like self-actualized person who is content and they're feeling appreciated and you're giving all the supports that they need to both themselves and as an employee and their families, that you are going to have a more productive employee. So that's why we present like benefit packages with full family health and welfare. We cover dependents as well, and we do it with no cost for the employee.
Wow.
It's 100% employer paid, and it's really hard to sort of navigate that system because when I first surveyed my staff, the younger folks wanted a cheaper plan. They wanted something that was like a catastrophic only insurance plan because they didn't want to pay anything out of pocket. But then when I talked to my older employees in their 60s and 70s, they wanted a benefit rich plan. And so how to navigate those two things, what I realized was there was no way to navigate and get both of those things until you just suck it up and pay for it. Like, so we got the benefit rich plan, and then I pay 100% of it. And because what I learned along the way was that there's a qualitative value to putting a safety net around your employees that's more than the dollars that you spend on it. Better and means more to them than if you just put the money on their paycheck, because when something bad happens in their life, and we've had employees, I mean, we had one person who had like their $600 a month prescription drug bill went down to $100 a month because of the benefit plan. We've had people who had a wife that had a week-long stay in a hospital, in emergency room, and it was $42,000 bill that they got. They came in my office to show me the insurance paperwork that brought it down to $250.
Oh my gosh.
And
wow.
Yeah. And so when you
so
hear stories like that, I mean, we had an employee that had cancer and had to get treatment, and very rare form of cancer, and to be able to go to the best doctors to get it treated quickly, and to not have to worry because they knew it was covered. I think that gives so much more like depth of meaning, and our relationship from the employers to the employee has just really formed a strong bond that you wouldn't think about normally when you're just sort of trying to figure out what you can afford in your benefit plan.
Right. I imagine that is difficult for so many employees to wrap their mind around, when they're looking at their expenses and, their P&L sheet. It seems counterintuitive to spend more on your employees and their benefits.
Well, for a service-based company, like we don't produce anything. Like, we're not a manufacturing company. There's no like physical assets that we own. Like everything that is valuable in my company are my human assets.
Yeah.
And you asked me like, how do I go out and recruit them? I mean, they mostly come to me, actually. Like I have 2 employees that were actually my former employers that I worked for early on, and people
Wow.
who had mentored me for 20 years who are now sort of at the end of their career and
Mm-hmm.
wanted to come back and work for me. And it's been a really tricky thing to sort
Yeah.
of, how do you manage somebody
Yeah,
who's been
that
your
is,
lifelong mentor,
yep.
but I'm supposed to tell them what to do now? Like, this
Yeah.
is weird, but it's been the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life.
That is so awesome. And I've heard several of them, talk about their experience, working with you or for you. And that just speaks volumes. And I know I spoke to Dr. K a little bit. I actually did an entire podcast with her and talked to her a little bit today. And she comes in, and you've brought her in
Yes.
with your employees. I'd love to hear a little more about why you did that and how that's going.
So when I first started my company, it was really, I had worked 13 and a half years for a PR firm in
Mm-hmm.
Wilsonville. And so when I started my company, I really kind of knew the things about the old business that I did
Mm-hmm.
not want to replicate
Right.
in my business.
Yeah.
And so I'd be like, well, we're not doing time slips anymore. We're not going to be, spending 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
making up stuff to put on the back of the invoice to justify our work. We're going to actually
Mm-hmm.
write our clients messages about what we really did this week to actually demonstrate real value. And so that's like one
Yeah.
example. But
Mm-hmm.
I came in with this laundry list of things that were like, I'm not doing this. We're not going to do that. But
Mm-hmm.
leadership through process of elimination is not leadership, right? Like knowing
Mm,
what
yeah.
you don't want to be, that can
Mm-hmm.
be informative at the beginning, but
Yeah.
it doesn't fully tell the picture of then what are we going to be? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to operate? What do we represent in the market?
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that's a hard question to answer. It
Yeah.
really is. And so
Mm-hmm.
going through sort of couple years, especially the first year with Dr. K, was
Mm-hmm.
incredibly informative
Wow.
because she pointed that stuff out and
Uh-huh.
she forced group conversations among the team that at that time, this was during COVID, right? Like we started
Yeah.
during the midst of the shutdown. And
Mm-hmm.
so my team really didn't feel like much of a team at the time. I had employee
Yeah.
in Coos Bay, one in
Mm-hmm.
Hermiston, one in
Mm-hmm.
Pendleton. Like everybody was working from home and there wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot of collegiality, like that feeling like we were operating as a team. And
Right.
to be able to try to gel that, we were like, well, what do you stand for and represent? And that was actually a lot harder to answer than I thought. But that's why now I'm much more confident in
Mm-hmm.
talking about it, that we're a values forward company. Like if you go to our website, you'll see a very strong code of ethics and standard that we have for how we operate as lobbyists and how we're
Mm-hmm.
always truthful, negotiate in good faith, don't go back on our word, always follow up with commitments that you made. And then also the support for our employees. And we go into that as
Mm-hmm.
part of our values. And then the support for the community and our work with local nonprofits. And so that's really
Wow.
been, it's changed everything about the way my team culture is. It's such much more positive. We
Mm.
all, through these emotional intelligence tests, learn how to show up for each other, how to meet each other where we're at. Her program is really, I call it leadership through emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Like knowing there's different type of people that process information in different ways and
Yeah.
how to identify when they're rising up to their penthouse where their personality
Mm-hmm.
type can access kind of like what she calls their superpower,
Yeah.
or when they're descending floors and heading to what
Basement.
she calls the basement
Yep.
brain, and then how to lift people up when you see
Yeah.
they're in decline.
Mm.
And so that's what I call showing up for your employees, meeting them where they're at. And then
Mm-hmm.
because you can never control other people's behavior as a leader, what you can control is your behavior. And
Mm-hmm.
so she's just taught me so much about how to deal with human interactions in
Mm-hmm.
like the most conflict resolution way to get things done. And she's not
Mm-hmm.
just teaching me, she's teaching my team too, because I know she talks about it too. It's like everyone, whether they're in a leadership hierarchy of my company
Mm-hmm.
or not, they're a leader in my
Right.
company because they manage their own accounts. Like
Yeah.
even my youngest employee, Peyton, who's
Mm-hmm.
18 years old, she has projects that she manages, and she has clients, and they're
Wow.
small clients, like it's managing a Facebook page or something like that for an
Right.
esthetician.
Uh-huh.
But she is a leader. She has
Yes,
to project that
absolutely.
confidence. And so she needs
Mm-hmm.
all of the same skills that I
Mm-hmm.
need to have. She's just deploying it in a different way.
Right. Right. Oh, I love that. And that's probably also so useful in addition to, emotional intelligence, but just the generational difference since you have between 18 and 73. Everybody was raised in a different time.
That is actually so funny because that's one of the most, there's more practical utility to the seminar she did on leadership across generations than probably any of them that she had, because people view authority differently. They recognize meaning in things differently. They have different cues that signal something's important. Like, so for one of my employees, if it's one of my 60-year-olds or 70-year-olds, if something's really important, I will write it down, handwritten note. This was one of the things she said. And that's the way to get that they know something's important if they have a handwritten note that tells them it is. And so I will do that frequently for Mark and Rick that work on my team. And it is funny. They will walk in my office like, hey, I got this message from you. Okay. And it really is important. On the flip side of it, for the younger generation, they're 18, 20 years old. They don't even want you to pick up the phone and call them, right? Like you just call them and it's ringing. They're like, whoa, Ryan's coming in hot here. Like what's going on? Like but if you text and just say, hey, do you have a moment to chat? I'd love to talk to you about this. They'll go, oh yeah, I'm available right now. And then you can call them and it's fine. But that little step in between has made a huge difference too.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's just like really funny little small things that if you're paying attention to it, can make all the difference in sort of creating that positive workplace culture where everybody sort of works fluidly.
So did you buy PacWest, or how did that come about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So PacWest Communications had been around in a name in politics for 20 years or so before I own a PacWest lobby group. So everyone did have this idea, and I even had the misconception that, like, I use the metaphor when I talk about like that my boss was going to get out of the car and I was essentially going to get in the car. I was like buying this vehicle from him and I'm going to get in and start driving. But that's not really how it worked at all. And I learned along the way pretty quickly that he wasn't giving me his car. I wasn't buying his car. I was building my own car, setting up my own legal entity, my own benefit plans, my own 401k profit sharing plan, and everything. And essentially what he was doing was signing over contracts to me. So he was essentially like siphoning fuel out of his vehicle that he could put in my vehicle, but I still had to build my own car. And that's a very different thing than what I thought it was going in at the front end. And so,
yeah. Well, after you built your car and started getting that fuel, what was an early obstacle that you had to overcome?
I mean, just setting everything up was a tremendous expense. Like I've had to spend $250,000 just for the right to send my first invoice to make my first dollar. Right. So I mean, that to me, I had to wiped out my retirement account. I took my whole life savings down. I had about $1,000 in the bank to start doing all that. I had to mortgage my house to get the gap financing loan so that I could make payroll my first month. And like that landed, payroll landed 2 days before payroll was going to pull that month. And that was an absolutely terrifying thing that we thought, oh my goodness, we might just not even get out of, we not even launch out of the gate here. But we made it. And then by the next month we had made payroll by 2 weeks. By then, the third month, it was never an issue again.
Oh my gosh.
Boy, it was really, it's not for the faint of heart. That first year, and I got my house out of hock in the first year, at the end of the first year, but that was a level of angst that I had never felt in my life. I didn't sleep well for that entire year, but it gave me a clarity and a sense of purpose that I had never felt such drive before and I'd always been a pretty good employee. I think I'd always kind of worked into management over every job I'd had since I was a teenager, but I had never had it be where if I lost my job, if I failed, it wouldn't just be losing my job. I would be losing my house and be homeless too. And that gives you a sharpness of focus that I don't think you could ever have if you're not in that exact sort of situation that entrepreneurs find themselves in when they're doing their startup.
Right. Yeah. And pretty much every listener right now is in a management, position, but mostly entrepreneurs and business owners. And so that is really inspiring and motivating for those that maybe are in that spot right now. And it sounds like just having your mission and your goals and like why you're doing what you're doing, that really helped you stay focused, like why you kept trying.
Yeah, but you had to figure it out along the way too. So
Yeah.
I don't want your listeners to think that like they need to have the perfect plan on
Okay.
paper
Yeah. True.
before they launch,
Mm-hmm.
because I certainly had a skeleton, like I
Yeah.
had ideas, I had certain pieces of the equation sort of that
Mm-hmm.
I knew and that I could answer. But then there were things that I didn't know, and I just had to get out and do it. And then you start to answer those questions, and you kind of
Mm-hmm.
build the plane while you're taking off from the runway. And
Right.
to mix another metaphor.
Wow. Yeah. So that metaphor goes well with this podcast title. But yeah, so just taking massive action,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, we covered a lot. Thank you so much for sharing all of that and breaking that down.
Thanks for having me. This was
And
really fun.
so, yeah, well, I hope to have you on again sometime soon. And thank you for all you do.